I was sitting in my office on the 14th floor, reviewing case files for what was supposed to be the biggest prosecution of my career, when my phone buzzed with a notification that would shatter everything. The email subject line read, "Urgent legal notice, estate of Charles Vance." My hands started trembling before I even opened it. Inside was a letter from attorney Miles Corbett, informing me that Serafina Vance and Victor Kane were contesting my grandfather's will, demanding the entire $2.7 million estate that Charles had left to me. The woman who abandoned me at 4 years old and the man who enabled her greed for decades now wanted to take away the last gift from the only parent I'd ever truly known. Before we go further into this story, if you've ever felt betrayed by family or had to fight for what's rightfully yours, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means everything, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let me take you back to where this all began. I was born Josephine Eleanor Kane on a cold February morning in 1989. My mother, Serafina, was 22, beautiful in that careless way that some women are, with blonde hair that caught the light and green eyes that never quite focused on anything for too long. My father, Victor, was a charming drifter with a gambling problem and a talent for making promises he never intended to keep. They married young, divorced younger, and the casualty of their impulsive romance was me. When I was 4 years old, on a Tuesday afternoon that I remember with the kind of clarity trauma burns into your brain, Serafina drove me to her parents' house in Connecticut. The Victorian mansion sat on 3 acres of manicured lawn, with white columns and black shutters that made it look like something from a storybook. I remember clutching my stuffed rabbit, Mr. Whiskers, as she pulled into the circular driveway. She didn't turn off the engine. She didn't come inside. She just leaned over, kissed my forehead with lips that smelled like expensive perfume and cigarettes, and said, "Mommy needs to find herself. Baby, Grandpa and Grandma will take good care of you." I watched her taillights disappear down the tree-lined driveway, and even at 4 years old, I somehow knew she wasn't coming back. Not really. Not in any way that mattered. Charles Vance, my grandfather, found me standing on the front steps an hour later, still clutching Mr. Whiskers. Tears dried on my cheeks. He was 62 then, a retired circuit court judge with silver hair, kind brown eyes, and hands that were always warm. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat down on the steps beside me, this dignified man in his pressed slacks and cardigan, and put his arm around my small shoulders. "Well then," he finally said, his voice like gravel and honey, "I suppose this means we get to spend more time together. How do you feel about pancakes for dinner?" That was Charles. He never made me feel abandoned. He made me feel chosen. My grandmother, Margaret, was softer around the edges. With white hair she wore in a neat bun and a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. She taught me to bake, to garden, to see beauty in small things. She died when I was 12, and I watched Charles grieve with the kind of quiet dignity that taught me strength. Doesn't mean you don't hurt. It means you don't let the hurt destroy you. Serafina came and went over the years like a comet, bright and destructive and entirely unpredictable. She'd show up on Christmas or my birthday. Sometimes both. Sometimes neither. Always with elaborate excuses and empty promises. "I'm getting my life together, Josie," she'd say, using the nickname only she was allowed to use. "Things are going to be different now." But different never came. What did come, regularly and with increasing frequency, were her requests for money. At first, it was small amounts. 1,000 here for rent she couldn't make, 2,000 there for a medical emergency that was never quite explained. But as I grew older and started paying attention, I realized the requests were constant and the amounts were staggering. Charles never said no. He'd sit at his mahogany desk in his study, surrounded by law books and photographs of Margaret, and write another check. I asked him once, when I was 16, why he kept giving her money when she never changed. He looked at me over his reading glasses, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Sadness, maybe, or hope that refused to die. Because she's my daughter, Eleanor, and hope is the last thing we should ever surrender. He'd started calling me Eleanor when I was 7, saying Josephine was my mother's choice. But Eleanor, strong and regal, was who I was becoming. The name stuck, becoming as much a part of my identity as his love. I graduated high school valedictorian, went to Yale on a full scholarship, and then to Columbia Law. Charles attended every graduation, sitting in the front row with a bouquet of yellow roses because Margaret had loved them. Serafina sent cards. Sometimes. Victor I never heard from at all, after he and Serafina split for good when I was 8. He'd drift in and out of her life over the years, always when he needed something, always leaving chaos in his wake. I became a prosecutor, driven by a deep belief in justice that Charles had instilled in me. I was good at it. Really good. I had a conviction rate of 87% and a reputation for being tough but fair. Charles was proud in that quiet way of his, displaying every newspaper article about my cases on the corkboard in his study. Serafina. On the rare occasions she called, I would ask how much money I was making now, and whether I could help out your mother with whatever her current crisis was. I said no. I'd learned that lesson. Money given to Serafina disappeared into a black hole of bad decisions and worse men. She didn't take it well. Our already tenuous relationship frayed further. But I told myself I didn't care. I had Charles. I had my work. That was enough. In his final years, Charles's health began to decline. Nothing dramatic. Just the slow accumulation of age. Arthritis. A heart that beat a little less reliably than it used to. I visited every Sunday without fail, sitting with him in his study, talking about cases and books and life. He'd made his wishes clear, updating his will with methodical precision. Everything was to go to me. The house, the investments, the money. You earned this, he told me one Sunday afternoon, his hands shaking slightly as he held his teacup. Not through blood, but through presence. Through love, that's what matters. I tried to protest. What about Serafina? She's still your daughter. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw the judge he'd been, stern and unyielding. I've given Serafina more than $600,000 over the past 22 years. Eleanor, $600,000. And in return, she's visited me 17 times. 17 times in over 3 decades. I know because Margaret kept a calendar, marking every promise Serafina broke with a red X. Do you know how many red X's there were? His voice cracked. Too many to count. He died on a Thursday morning in March, peacefully in his sleep, with me holding his hand. I'd stayed over the night before because he'd seemed frailer than usual. The doctor said his heart simply stopped, that it was as gentle a passing as anyone could hope for. I was 34 years old, and the man who'd been my true father was gone. The funeral was held on a gray Saturday that matched my grief. I stood at the graveside next to Margaret's headstone, watching them lower Charles into the earth, and I felt utterly alone. Until Serafina showed up. She arrived late, dressed in black Chanel with oversized sunglasses, leaning on Victor's arm. Victor, who'd somehow crawled back into her life, looking 10 years older and 20 pounds heavier, with the bloated face of a longtime drinker and the shifty eyes of someone always looking for an angle. Serafina made a scene, throwing herself on the casket, wailing loud enough to disturb the other mourners. I stood there, numb and exhausted, and watched this performance of grief from a woman who'd seen Charles maybe twice in the last 5 years. She didn't speak to me. She didn't acknowledge me. She just made sure everyone saw her pain. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I took the day off work, putting on my most professional suit-like armor, and drove to the office of Charles's attorney, Henry Morrison, who'd been his friend for 40 years. The office was oak-paneled and book-lined, smelling of leather and old paper. Henry, white-haired and grave-faced, greeted me with a gentle handshake and condolences that felt genuine. Serafina and Victor arrived 15 minutes late. She'd dressed for drama again, all in black with a veil, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Victor wore a cheap suit that pulled across his shoulders and kept checking his phone. They sat across from me, and Serafina finally acknowledged my existence with a cold stare. "Hello, Josephine," she said, emphasizing the name she'd given me, the name I'd left behind. "I'm surprised you're here. This is family business." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "I am family," I said quietly. Charles made sure of that. Henry cleared his throat and began reading. The preliminaries were standard. Small bequests to his housekeeper Sarah, to his church, to various charities. Then came the main provision. To my granddaughter, Eleanor Josephine Kane, I leave the entirety of my estate, including the house at Oakwood Manor, all investments, accounts, and personal property, totaling approximately $2 million. She has been my daughter in all the ways that matter, and I trust her to use this legacy wisely and well. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Serafina stood up so fast her chair fell backward. "This is impossible," she hissed. "I'm his daughter. His actual daughter. She's nothing. She's nobody. She manipulated him, poisoned him against me." I stood up too, and for the first time in my life, I looked my mother directly in the eye and let her see my anger. "I was there, Serafina. For 29 years. I was there. Where were you?" She slapped me, right there in the lawyer's office, her palm cracking across my cheek, hard enough to make my ears ring. Henry jumped to his feet, and Victor grabbed Serafina's arm, pulling her back. But the damage was done, and not in the way she intended. Because in that moment, something inside me hardened into diamond-sharp clarity. These people were not my family. They were strangers who shared my DNA. Nothing more. I walked out of that office with my cheek still stinging and my resolve absolute. If Serafina wanted a war, she was going to get one. But she didn't know who she was fighting. She didn't know that I'd spent 11 years prosecuting criminals, learning how to build unassailable cases, how to find the truth buried under layers of lies. She didn't know that Charles had taught me to fight, not with emotion, but with evidence, with logic, with the unshakable foundation of facts. 2 days later, I received the letter from Miles Corbett. It was thick, official, filled with legal terminology designed to intimidate. The gist was clear. Serafina and Victor were contesting the will on the grounds of undue influence, claiming that I had manipulated Charles in his declining years, isolated him from his loving daughter, and essentially stolen their inheritance. They were demanding the entire estate be set aside and divided according to intestate succession, which would give everything to Serafina. I read it 3 times, each time feeling my anger burn hotter and colder simultaneously until it crystallized into something unbreakable. Then I did what I do best. I started building my case. First, I went through every document Charles had left me. He'd been meticulous, as befitted a judge, keeping records of everything. I found bank statements going back 25 years, showing regular transfers to Serafina. I sat down with a calculator and added them up. $660,000. Over 22 years, in amounts ranging from $800 to $40,000. Charles had given Serafina more than $500,000. But it was the ledger I found in his study that broke my heart and steeled my spine. It was a small leather-bound notebook, tucked in the back of his desk drawer. In Charles's neat handwriting, he'd recorded every transaction, every request, and next to each one, a brief note. For Serafina's rent, she promises to visit for Christmas. For Serafina's car repair, she says she'll bring Eleanor to see Margaret in the hospital. For Serafina's emergency dental work, she swears she's staying in Connecticut this time. Promise after promise. Broken. Payment after payment. Made. The math was damning. But it was the emotional ledger that destroyed me. Tucked in the back pages were photographs. Serafina in Paris. Designer bags on her arm. Serafina in Cabo. Sunbathing on a yacht. Serafina at expensive restaurants. Jewelry glittering at her throat. All posted on social media while Charles ate dinner alone. While he went to his own doctor's appointments with no one but his housekeeper. While he sat in his study, looking at pictures of the daughter who was too busy spending his money to spare him an hour of her time. I made copies of everything. Then I started digging deeper. Charles had been thorough, but I could be more so. I hired a private investigator, a retired FBI agent named Thomas Reeves, who owed me a favor from a case I'd helped with. Find out everything about Serafina Vance and Victor Kane. I told him. Financial records. Legal history. Everything. If they've jaywalked, I want to know about it. Thomas was good. Really good. Within 2 weeks, he handed me a file that was 3 inches thick. Victor had a gambling problem that went way beyond casual. He had outstanding debts to 3 different casinos totaling over $150,000. He'd been arrested twice for writing bad checks, and once for assault in a bar fight over a poker game. He'd filed for bankruptcy in 2019 and again in 2022. He was exactly the kind of parasite who'd latch onto someone like Serafina, who had access to an aging father with deep pockets. Serafina's file was just as revealing. She'd been married and divorced 3 times, not counting Victor. Each divorce had involved significant financial settlements that she'd burned through within 2 years. She had a history of shopping addiction, documented in court records from her second divorce, where her ex-husband had detailed $40,000 in credit card debt for clothes, shoes, and jewelry. Most damning, she'd been involved in 2 previous estate disputes, once with Margaret's sister and once with Charles's brother, both of whom she'd tried to sue for a larger share of their inheritances. Both cases had been dismissed, but the smoking gun was in her emails. Thomas had found a tech specialist who'd recovered deleted emails from an old account Serafina had abandoned. In them, she detailed her strategy for managing Charles. "The old man's good for at least another 50 kelvins if I play it right," she wrote to Victor. "Just need to cry about being broke and mention Eleanor's expensive education. He'll fold like he always does." Another email, dated just 3 months before Charles died. "He's leaving everything to Eleanor. Can you believe that? After everything I've been through, we need to contest it. Miles says, we have a case if we can prove diminished capacity." Miles Corbett, the attorney who'd sent me the legal notice. He wasn't just Serafina's lawyer. He was her co-conspirator, strategizing about how to break Charles's will before Charles was even in the ground. I felt sick reading those emails, but I also felt validated. This wasn't grief or hurt feelings. This was calculated greed, pure and simple. And I was going to expose it. I reached out to my mentor, Judge Patricia Thorne, a 60-year-old powerhouse who'd taken me under her wing when I was a baby prosecutor. She listened to my story over coffee in her chambers, her dark eyes sharp behind her reading glasses. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "Eleanor, you know this is going to get ugly. Serafina will play the victim. She'll make you look like the villain. The media loves stories about greedy relatives stealing from poor grieving daughters." I nodded. "I know, but I'm not backing down. Charles chose me for a reason. He trusted me to protect his legacy. I won't let them destroy it." Patricia smiled, a fierce expression that reminded me why prosecutors feared her in court. "Good. Then let me introduce you to someone who can help. David Chen. He's a forensic accountant and digital investigator. If there's dirt to find, he'll find it." David Chen was 38, brilliant, and had the kind of intense focus that made him perfect for detail-oriented work. He looked at the files I gave him, adjusted his glasses, and said, "This is going to be fun. I hate people who prey on the elderly." Over the next month, David and I worked together to build an unassailable case. He traced every dollar Charles had given Serafina and showed exactly where it went. $100,000 that was supposedly for medical expenses had actually been spent on a trip to Italy and a designer wardrobe. $50,000 for business investment had gone straight to Victor's gambling debts. On and on it went. A paper trail of lies and manipulation that painted a picture of financial abuse. But we needed more than financial records. We needed to prove Charles's state of mind, his capacity, his genuine wishes. That meant witnesses. I started with Sarah Jenkins, Charles's housekeeper of 15 years. She was a stout woman in her 60s, with steel gray hair and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that came from decades of dealing with other people's messes. I met her at a diner near Oakwood Manor, and over coffee and pie. I asked her to tell me about Charles's last years. Sarah didn't hesitate. "Mr. Vance was sharp as a tack until the day he died," she said firmly. "He did the crossword every morning in pen. He managed his own finances, read 3 newspapers a day, and could quote legal precedents from memory. Anyone who says otherwise is lying." She paused, her jaw tightening. "And Miss Serafina? She didn't care about her father. She cared about his money. I was there for most of those phone calls where she'd cry and beg for help. The minute he'd agree to send money, she'd perk right up and be off the phone. She came to visit maybe twice in the last 5 years. and both times she spent more time going through the house taking pictures of valuables than she did talking to her father. I asked Sarah if she'd testify to that in court. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Sweetheart, I'd be honored." Next, I contacted Dr. David Mendoza, Charles's physician for the last decade. He pulled Charles's medical records with the proper authorization and reviewed them with me in his office. "Your grandfather had the cognitive function of a man 20 years younger." Dr. Mendoza said, "We did full neurological assessments twice a year. His memory was excellent. His reasoning sound. 6 months before he died, he scored a 29 out of 30 on the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. That's not diminished capacity. That's better than most people half his age. More importantly, Dr. Mendoza had notes from conversations with Charles about his estate planning. He told me explicitly that he was leaving everything to you because you were the only family who'd actually been family," the doctor said. He was very clear about his reasoning, very firm in his decision. He even said he expected Serafina to contest it, and that he'd made sure his will was bulletproof. I added Dr. Mendoza to my witness list. Then I found the people Serafina had sued before. Margaret's sister, Helen, was 83 and still spry. Living in Florida. She remembered Serafina all too well. That girl sued me for $100,000 when Margaret died, claiming her mother had promised her grandmother's jewelry. Helen told me over a video call, never mind that Margaret had explicitly given those pieces to me in her will. Serafina didn't care about what her mother wanted. She just wanted what she thought she was owed. The court threw it out, but it cost me $20,000 in legal fees. She's a vulture. Dear, be careful. Charles's brother's widow, Patricia, had a similar story. Serafina had contested her husband's will, claiming he'd promised her a portion of his estate because Charles had gotten more from their parents. That case had also been dismissed, but not before causing tremendous stress and expense. I contacted both women and asked if they'd be willing to testify about Serafina's pattern of behavior. They both agreed immediately. "Someone needs to stop her," Patricia said grimly. "She's made a career out of exploiting family." But the crown jewel of my evidence came from an unexpected source. While going through Charles's computer files, which he'd left me the password to in a sealed envelope, I found a video file dated 2 weeks before his death. My hands shook as I clicked play. Charles appeared on the screen, sitting in his study, the afternoon light streaming through the window behind him. He looked tired but clear-eyed, his voice steady. "If you're watching this, I'm gone, and I assume Serafina is making trouble. I'm recording this as my final testament, to remove any doubt about my wishes or my state of mind." He looked directly at the camera, and I felt like he was looking at me across time. "I am Charles Edward Vance, Formé Circuit Court Judge, 79 years old. I am of sound mind and body. This is April 15, 2025. I want to state unequivocally that I am leaving my entire estate to my granddaughter, Eleanor Josephine Kane. She has been my daughter in every meaningful sense for over 29 years. She has cared for me, visited me, loved me without condition or expectation." His expression hardened. "My biological daughter, Serafina Ann Vance, has made her choices. I have supported her financially for over 3 decades, giving her well over $500,000. In return, she has visited me fewer than 20 times. She calls when she needs money. She disappears when she has it. I love her because she is my daughter, but love does not obligate me to reward her absence." He paused, and I saw pain flicker across his face. "If Serafina is watching this, I know that I loved you until my last breath. But you chose to be absent. Eleanor chose to be present. The law recognizes both blood and choice. And so do I. Eleanor has earned this inheritance through 29 years of love, care, and loyalty. That is worth more than any genetic connection." He leaned forward slightly. "To anyone viewing this, I know that I made this decision freely, with full mental capacity, and with the blessing of my attorney, my physician, and my conscience. Eleanor is my daughter. She is my legacy, and I trust her completely with everything I'm leaving behind." The video ended. I sat there crying, ugly sobs that came from the deepest part of my grief. Charles had known. He'd known Serafina would fight, and he'd left me the weapon to defend against her. I made multiple copies of that video and secured them in different locations. Then I prepared for war. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for early June. I took a leave of absence from work, something I'd never done, because this was too important to handle distracted. My colleagues were supportive, especially my boss, District Attorney Rachel Williams, who dealt with her own family drama and understood what I was facing. I hired my own attorney, Caroline Becker, a shark of an estates lawyer with a reputation for never losing. She was 50, silver-haired, and had a smile that could cut glass. When I showed her my evidence, her eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. "Oh, this is going to be fun," she said, echoing David Chen. "Serafina has no idea what she's walked into." The morning of the preliminary hearing, I put on my best suit, the charcoal gray Armani that I saved for big trials, and walked into the courthouse with my head high. Caroline was beside me, her briefcase full of ammunition. David Chen and Thomas Reeves were in the gallery, along with Sarah Jenkins, Dr. Mendoza, and Judge Thorne, who'd taken the morning off to show support. Serafina arrived like she was walking a red carpet, all flowing black dress and dramatic makeup, leaning on Victor's arm. Miles Corbett was with them, a slick man in his 50s with styled hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. When Serafina saw me, her expression twisted into something ugly. "Murderer," she hissed as she passed. "You killed my father." I didn't respond. I just looked at her until she looked away. The judge presiding was the Honorable Martin Cross, 70 years old, white-haired, and known for his no-nonsense approach. He reviewed the case file, looked at both parties, and said, "This is a preliminary hearing to determine if there's sufficient cause to move forward with contesting the will. Mr. Corbett, you may present your arguments." Miles stood, buttoning his jacket, and launched into his opening statement. He painted a picture of Charles as a vulnerable old man, isolated from his loving daughter by his manipulative granddaughter who'd controlled his life and finances. He claimed I'd exerted undue influence, that Charles had been suffering from diminished capacity, that the will was invalid because it was made under duress. It was a compelling story if you didn't know any facts. Serafina dabbed at her eyes at appropriate moments. Victor looked appropriately supportive, but Judge Cross's expression remained neutral. Then it was Caroline's turn. She stood, smiled pleasantly, and said, "Your Honor, we will show that this contest is not just without merit. It's an insult to the memory of Charles Vance and an attempted fraud on this court. The evidence will demonstrate that Mr. Vance was fully competent, that his decision was made freely and with complete awareness, and that the true motivation of the contestants is greed, pure and simple." She presented our evidence methodically, the financial records showing decades of support for Serafina, the ledger with Charles's heartbreaking notes, the photographs of Serafina's lavish lifestyle, the medical records proving Charles's cognitive function, Dr. Mendoza's testimony about Charles's explicit statements regarding his estate planning. Then she played the video. The courtroom went absolutely silent. Charles's voice filled the space, clear and firm and unquestionable. I watched Serafina's face drain of color. Victor shifted uncomfortably. Miles Corbett's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. When the video ended, Caroline said quietly, "Mr. Vance knew exactly what he was doing. Your Honor, he knew his daughter would contest his will. He created this video 2 weeks before his death, specifically to prevent that. His words are clear. His reasoning is sound. There is no diminished capacity here. There is only a daughter who cannot accept that actions have consequences." Judge Cross leaned back in his chair, studying Serafina. "Miss Vance, did you visit your father in the last year of his life?" Serafina stood, stumbling slightly. Yes, Your Honor. I visited him." "How many times?" She hesitated. Several times." "Define several." "I don't remember exactly." Judge Cross looked at Caroline. "Do you have records?" Caroline pulled out the calendar Margaret had kept, the one with all the red X marks. "Your Honor, Mrs. Margaret Vance kept a calendar marking every time Serafina promised to visit. The red marks indicate broken promises. In the last 5 years of Charles Vance's life, Serafina visited him exactly 3 times. Once for his 75th birthday party, once after he was hospitalized with pneumonia, and once 3 months before his death. Each visit lasted less than 2 hours. Serafina sat down abruptly. Miles Corbett stood quickly. "Your Honor, the number of visits doesn't negate biological relationship or legal rights to inheritance." "No," Judge Cross agreed, "but it speaks to motivation. And when combined with evidence of the deceased's clear mental capacity and explicit wishes, it makes your contest appear rather thin." He looked at Serafina. "Ms. Vance, how much money did your father give you over the years?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "I don't. It was help. I needed help." $660,000. Caroline said. "We have bank records documenting every transfer." Judge Cross's eyebrows rose. $660,000 over 22 years. "And you're claiming you were neglected and deserve more," he shook his head. "Miss Becker, do you have anything else?" "Yes. Your Honor, we have evidence of previous estate disputes Ms. Vance has initiated, demonstrating a pattern of contesting wills when she doesn't receive what she believes she's entitled to. We also have evidence that Mr. Corbett and Miss Vance were discussing how to contest this will before Mr. Vance had even passed away." She presented the recovered emails. Miles Corbett's face went pale. Serafina made a small sound of distress. Judge Cross read the emails, his expression growing darker. "Mr. Corbett, did you counsel your client to contest this will before the testator was deceased?" Miles stood stiffly. We discussed hypotheticals. Your Honor, estate planning scenarios. While plotting how to claim diminished capacity for a man who was still alive and healthy, Judge Cross's voice was cold. "That strikes me as premature at best and conspiracy at worst." He set down the papers. "I've seen enough. The preliminary evidence overwhelmingly supports the validity of Mr. Vance's will. His mental capacity is documented and unquestionable. His wishes were clearly and explicitly stated. The video testimony is particularly compelling. Unless you have something substantially more convincing than hurt feelings and disappointed greed, Mr. Corbett, I'm inclined to dismiss this contest." Serafina jumped to her feet. "This isn't fair. I'm his daughter, his real daughter. She's nothing. She's just some abandoned brat he felt sorry for." The words hung in the air. Evan Victor looked shocked. Miles Corbett tried to grab Serafina's arm, but she shook him off. She pointed at me, her face twisted with rage. "You stole him from me. You turned him against me. Everything I did. Every mistake I made. You were there whispering in his ear, making me look bad." I stood up slowly. For the first time in this entire proceeding, I spoke directly to her. "I didn't have to make you look bad. Serafina, you did that yourself. Every broken promise, every manipulation, every time you chose money over relationship. I didn't steal Charles from you. You gave him away." She tried to lunge at me across the aisle. Victor and Miles both grabbed her, holding her back while she screamed obscenities. Judge Cross banged his gavel. "Order, Ms. Vance. Control yourself, or I'll have you removed from this courtroom." It took several minutes for everyone to calm down. Serafina was trembling with rage. Mascara streaked down her face. Victor looked like he wanted to disappear. Miles Corbett was frantically whispering to them, clearly trying to salvage something from this disaster. Judge Cross looked at them with undisguised contempt. "I'm going to say this once, and I suggest you all listen carefully. This contest is denied. The will of Charles Edward Vance is upheld in its entirety. Furthermore, I'm ordering Ms. Vance and Mr. Kane to pay all legal fees associated with this frivolous action, including Ms. Kane's attorney fees, investigative costs, and court costs." Serafina started crying, great heaving sobs that sounded performative, even in her distress. Judge Cross continued, "And let me be clear. If I see another contest filed in this matter, I will consider it harassment and grounds for sanctions." Mr. Vance made his wishes known. This court will honor them. We're adjourned. He banged the gavel one last time and left the bench. I stood there, feeling like my knees might give out. Caroline grabbed my arm, steadying me. "You did it," she said. "It's over." But it wasn't quite over. As we were leaving the courtroom, Serafina pushed past the crowd and got right in my face. "This isn't finished," she hissed. "I'll make you pay for this. I'll destroy you." I looked at her. This woman who'd given birth to me but had never been a mother. And I felt nothing but pity. "You already destroyed yourself, Serafina. You just refused to see it." Victor pulled her away, and they left with Miles Corbett, who looked like he was already calculating how to distance himself from this mess. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. News of the case spread through legal circles and then hit the local media. The narrative that emerged wasn't kind to Serafina. Headlines read, "Daughter contests will after receiving $660 kelvins, and judge's deathbed video exposes family betrayal." The video Charles had made went viral after someone leaked it. And suddenly everyone had an opinion about greedy relatives and elder abuse. Serafina tried to fight back, giving interviews where she painted herself as the victim. But the evidence was too damning. Every media outlet that looked into the story found the same pattern: an absent daughter, a supportive granddaughter, and an old man who'd made his choice and documented it thoroughly. But then something unexpected happened. David Chen, still digging through financial records, found something troubling. Victor had been making regular withdrawals from an account at First National Bank under the name Charles E. Vance Trust. When David showed me the documents, my stomach dropped. "This account doesn't exist in any of Charles's estate documents," he said, adjusting his glasses. "But it has his social security number and signature on the opening paperwork." I looked at the signature. It was close to Charles's handwriting, but not quite right. The loops were too uniform, the pressure too consistent. "This is forgery," I said. "How much has he taken?" David scrolled through the records. $83,000 over the past 2 years. Small withdrawals. Nothing that would trigger fraud alerts. 500 here. 1,000 there. I called Caroline immediately. She contacted the bank's fraud department and the local police. Within 48 hours, Victor Kane was arrested for identity theft, forgery, and elder financial abuse. When the police searched his apartment, they found not only evidence of the forged documents, but also a stack of credit cards he'd opened in Charles's name. The dominoes kept falling. During Victor's interrogation, he gave up Serafina, revealing that she'd known about the scheme and had received a cut of the stolen money. Text messages between them discussed the old man's money and how to bleed him dry before he kicks it. The DA's office filed charges against Serafina as an accomplice to fraud. I sat in the gallery during Serafina's arraignment, watching her stand before a judge in an orange jumpsuit. No designer clothes or dramatic makeup to hide behind. She looked small and old and frightened. When her eyes found mine, I saw something flicker there. Not remorse exactly, but recognition. She'd gone too far, and now she was paying the price. Victor pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. Serafina's case went to trial. I didn't testify because I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. She was convicted of conspiracy to commit fraud and accessory after the fact. The judge sentenced her to 3 years, with restitution requirements that would keep her in debt for the rest of her life. Before she was led away, she asked to speak to me. I almost said no, but something made me agree. We met in a small conference room at the courthouse, a guard standing by the door. She sat across from me, hands cuffed in front of her, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, "I loved him. You know, my father. I did love him." I looked at her, this stranger who'd shaped my life through her absence, and I said, "Maybe you did, but love without action is just a word. It doesn't feed anyone. It doesn't comfort anyone. It doesn't build anything." She nodded slowly, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I know that now. Too late. But I know it." She paused. "I'm sorry. For all of it. For leaving you. For using him. For everything. I wanted to feel vindicated. I wanted to feel angry or satisfied or something. But all I felt was tired. I don't know if I can forgive you." I said honestly, "But I can let go." For my sake, not yours. She nodded again. That's fair. She looked down at her hands. For what it's worth, he was right to choose you. You were the daughter he deserved. I never was. They took her away after that. I walked out of the courthouse into bright summer sunshine and breathed deeply for what felt like the first time in months. The aftermath took time to settle. Serafina had to sell her house, her car, everything of value, to begin paying restitution. She'd declared bankruptcy, but still owed hundreds of thousands. Her social circle, such as it was, evaporated overnight. No one wanted to be associated with someone who'd stolen from their dying father. I focused on honoring Charles's legacy. I used part of the inheritance to establish the Charles E. Vance Foundation, which provided scholarships and support services for foster children and adopted children from non-traditional families. The first scholarship went to a 17-year-old girl who'd been raised by her great-aunt after her parents abandoned her. When I met her at the awards ceremony, I saw myself at that age, uncertain but determined, and I knew Charles would have approved. I kept Oakwood Manor but transformed it. Sarah stayed on as caretaker, but I opened the house for foundation events, creating a warm space where kids who'd been abandoned or overlooked could come and feel valued. I kept Charles's study exactly as he'd left it, books and all, as a reminder of what love and dedication looked like. My career continued to flourish. The publicity from the case, while unwanted, had raised my profile. When a position opened on the circuit court, the same court where Charles had served for 30 years, several judges recommended me. At 35, I became one of the youngest circuit court judges in the state. The day of my investiture, I stood in the same courtroom where Charles had presided for decades, and Judge Patricia Thorne placed the robe on my shoulders. I looked out at the audience and saw faces that mattered. Sarah Jenkins in the front row, dabbing at her eyes. David Chen grinning proudly. Dr. Mendoza and Henry Morrison, Charles's old attorney, my colleagues from the DA's office, and in my mind, I saw Charles and Margaret, smiling that quiet smile of pride that needed no words. During my speech, I talked about justice not just as punishment but as recognition of effort, of loyalty, of love given without expectation of return. I talked about how family is built through presence, through showing up day after day, year after year. I didn't mention Serafina or Victor by name, but everyone who'd followed the case knew who I meant. That night, alone in my new chambers, I found a letter tucked into one of the law books Charles had given me. It was in his handwriting, dated a week before he died. My darling Eleanor, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hope you've found this when you need it most. You are my greatest achievement. Not because of anything you've done, but because of who you've become despite everything. The world tried to break you when you were 4 years old, and instead, you became strong enough to lift others. That is the truest form of justice. I am so proud to be your grandfather. Your father in all the ways that matter. Live well, love freely, and never doubt that you were wanted, chosen, and cherished every single day I had with you. All my love, Charles. I cried then. Great gulping sobs of grief and gratitude and relief. The battle was over. Justice had been served. But more than that, I'd protected the legacy of the man who'd saved me, who'd shown me that family wasn't about blood but about choice, presence, and unwavering love. A year passed. I settled into my role as judge, presiding over cases with the fairness and compassion Charles had modeled. The foundation grew, helping dozens of children find stability and hope. Oakwood Manor became known not as the site of a family betrayal but as a sanctuary for kids who needed to know they mattered. One afternoon, my clerk brought me a letter. It was from Serafina, written from the Women's Correctional Facility where she was serving her sentence. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. Inside, her handwriting was smaller, shakier than I remembered. Dear Eleanor, it began. I don't expect you to read this, but I'm writing anyway because my therapist says I need to acknowledge the truth without expecting anything in return. You were right about everything. I was absent. I was greedy. I used my father and failed you in every possible way. I see that now, stripped of all the justifications I told myself for years. Prison gives you a lot of time to think. And mostly, I think about all the moments I missed. Your first day of school. Your graduations. Your successes. I chose not to be there. And I can't take that back. I can't take back the pain I caused. I don't know if there's redemption for someone like me. My therapist says there can be, but I don't know if I believe her. What I do know is that my father was right to choose you. You earned his love through presence and care. I squandered mine through absence and greed. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm just acknowledging that you were the daughter he deserved. And I never was. I hope you're happy. I hope you use the inheritance well. And I hope someday I can become even a fraction of the person you are. Serafina. I read it twice. There was no manipulation in these words. No plea for money or sympathy. Just raw acknowledgement of failure and loss. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. But I didn't throw the letter away either. I kept it in my desk drawer as a reminder that people are complex, that even those who hurt us most deeply are capable of growth, even if it comes too late to repair what was broken. Victor I never heard from again. He served his sentence quietly and, from what I heard through legal channels, was released and disappeared into obscurity. I didn't seek him out. That chapter was closed. 3 years after Charles's death, on a crisp October morning, I stood in the cemetery beside his and Margaret's graves. I'd come alone, bringing yellow roses as I did every month. I told them about my week, about the cases I'd heard, about the new kids the foundation was helping. I told them about the scholarship recipient who'd just been accepted to Yale, following in my footsteps. And I told them I'd finally forgiven Serafina, not for her sake, but for mine, because carrying anger was exhausting, and Charles had taught me that peace was more valuable than vengeance. I'd never have a relationship with her. That ship had sailed long ago, but I could acknowledge she was a broken person who'd made terrible choices, and I could let go of my need for her to suffer. As I stood there, a young girl approached hesitantly. She was maybe 13, thin and uncertain, with dark hair and wary eyes. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Are you Judge Kane?" I smiled. "I am. What's your name?" "Maya. I got one of your scholarships. For kids in foster care. I just wanted to say thank you. It's the first time anyone's ever..." She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. I knew that feeling. The overwhelming gratitude when someone sees you, chooses you, believes in you. I pulled a card from my purse and handed it to her. "Maya, if you ever need anything, advice, help, or just someone to talk to, you call me." "Okay," she nodded, clutching the card like it was precious. "Why do you do this, the foundation and everything?" I looked back at Charles and Margaret's graves, then at this girl who reminded me so much of my younger self. Because someone once chose me when they didn't have to, and that choice changed everything. I'm just passing it forward. She smiled, a tentative thing that transformed her face, and I saw possibility there. Maybe she'd be okay. Maybe she'd thrive. And maybe one day she'd stand where I was standing, helping another lost kid find their way home. That was Charles's real legacy. Not the money, not the house, not even the foundation itself. It was the belief that love is a choice you make every day through presence, through care, through showing up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I'm 38 now, still serving on the bench, still running the foundation, still living in Oakwood Manor surrounded by memories of the family who chose me. Serafina was released from prison last year. She sent me one more letter, asking if we could meet. I declined, gently but firmly. Some wounds heal better with distance. She's rebuilding her life in another state, and I wish her well. But from afar, sometimes, late at night in Charles's study, I sit in his leather chair and think about the journey from that 4-year-old girl on the steps to the woman I am now. I think about abandonment and chosen family, about greed and generosity, about presence and absence. I think about how justice isn't always loud and dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just living well, loving deeply, and using your pain to help others heal. Charles used to say that the law was important, but people were more important. That justice without compassion was just revenge. But compassion without justice was just enabling. He taught me to find the balance, to be strong but kind, firm but understanding. He taught me that being chosen was a gift, but choosing to stay was a responsibility. I keep his photograph on my desk at the courthouse. In it, he's smiling that gentle smile. Margaret beside him, both of them looking at something beyond the camera, looking at me. I always thought, looking at the future, they'd helped create through their choice to love a little girl who wasn't theirs by blood, but became theirs through every moment that mattered. Family isn't about who gave birth to you. It's about who shows up, who stays, who chooses you day after day, year after year, without condition or expectation. Charles and Margaret showed me that, and now I try to show it to others. That's the story. That's the justice. Not perfect, not without pain, but real and earned and mine. So let me ask you something. Have you ever had to fight for what's rightfully yours? Have you ever been chosen by someone who didn't have to choose you? Have you learned that family is built through presence, not just blood? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and your stories matter to me. And if this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that justice is possible and that love through choice is the most powerful force in the world, hit that like button and subscribe, because there are more stories to tell, more truths to share, and more people who need to know they're not alone in their fight. Justice isn't always fast. It isn't always loud. But when it comes, when you stand in the light you fought for and know that you honored those who loved you, it's worth every battle, every tear, every moment of doubt. Charles taught me that, and now I'm teaching it forward, one case at a time, one child at a time, one story at a time. That's his real legacy. That's mine too. And maybe, if you're listening, it can be yours as well.